Hello everyone, here we are again, another episode. I'm Mike Bloom, this is Russ, and last time we met we talked about we're going to cover a few key principles, and we're continuing on with that. We're not quite ready to dive fully into the standard just yet.
Well, I thought it'd be useful, Mike, to talk about some of the key concepts of what the new standard, the revised standard, is actually built around before we actually got into the standard. So when we got to those, I'd understand why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, remember, many of you guys and our clients are already certified to the existing standard. Wouldn't they already be familiar with some of these that we're covering?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. In fact, many of you could probably teach this. So it's not a question of most people won't know this, but everyone's going to need to know this now, and particularly the ISO folks. And so I thought it would be useful to at least cover it. We're not going to spend a great deal of time in it, but at least take a look at some of these key concepts.
Yeah, get everyone on the same page kind of thing. We do, we say this all the time, but we invite your questions, especially if this is new ground for you guys. Whatever questions you have, send them our way. We'd be happy to answer them. And
or try to. Well, the other thing that would be really helpful is if you guys have, or gals, have examples of how you might be implementing some of this stuff,
right,
or how you've seen these concepts in action. I mean, that's how we pick up what we know, is learning from you folks. So please share with us, and we want you to be part of this.
Yeah, real world examples are the best ones.
As Mike mentioned, these are the concepts you know, but the ones that we really want to talk about are risk-based thinking, which is built throughout the standards. So we want to spend some time on that. We want to talk about plan, do, check, act. We want to touch on conformance versus performance, although we're going to deal with that mostly as we get into the standard. And we also want to talk about process and system management.
And we've mentioned these before, and I know Plan, Do, Check, Act has been in previous ISO 9001 standards. Can you tell us how it's different this time around?
Well, it's not so much that Plan, Do, Check, Act is new, but the intent is that it's actually be used this time.
Right,
so the higher level standards are all pretty familiar with this. And by the way, we don't mean any slight to ISO when we talk about higher level standards. It's just that the AS 9100, AS 9110, AS 9120 standards and TS 16949 all have ISO built into it, so it's a higher level standard.
It's just common to call those ones the higher ones. So risk-based thinking, let's define that real quick. As it is defined by the standard, it includes, so here's the quote. It's, "Not all the processes of the quality management system represent the same level of risk in terms of the organization's ability to meet its objectives, and the consequences of processes, product, service, or system nonconformities are not the same for all organizations. For some organizations, the consequences of delivering nonconforming products and services can result in minor inconveniences to the customer. For others, the consequences can be far-reaching and even fatal. Risk-based thinking, therefore, means considering risk qualitatively and, depending on the organization's context, quantitatively, while defining the rigor and degree of formality needed to plan and control the quality management system, as well as its component processes and activities."
So you might have noticed one of the things that we're saying here, and that the standard is saying, is that risk is not the same for every organization.
Right. Like if I run down to the hardware store, I buy a drill, I come home, I go to use it, it's faulty. It's annoying, but it's not really that big of a deal. If, on the other hand, I'm flying somewhere or I'm in a shuttle and it's about to launch, you got a faulty part, that's a completely different story.
Exactly. And so the standard really requires that risk-based thinking is based upon system performance. It also requires that risk is looked at in not only the system, but also process management. And this is where risk-based thinking really comes into play, is when you're looking at the component processes of a system.
Right. And the revised standard, it requires that you identify risk for each component process, identify the mitigating actions, and then ensure that they're taken.
Absolutely right.
So how is that really different from the previous requirements?
Well, risk-based thinking has always been implied. That terminology has never really been used, but it's been implied. For example, preventive action is one of the ways that they were looking at identifying risks and then mitigating them. So
Yeah. Interesting note that the preventive action process and its requirement was actually removed from this revision.
yes, and it's no surprise that this revision, preventive action was removed. I mean, I've audited hundreds of companies, and no one has really had a robust preventive action system that I've seen. Everyone had a preventive action system because it was required in order to be certified, but it wasn't. There wasn't part of a risk-based thinking process.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, corrective action, for example, is in many organizations needs to be a robust process. But when you have a customer complaint, they'll come and find you. You don't have to go looking for
Right,
them.
yeah.
I don't care if you're in the bathroom; they'll come beat the door down. And you got a customer yelling at you. You got to get it fixed. Preventive actions, however, those aren't the things that are going to come and find you. You got to go looking for those.
Yeah.
And I have yet to be in a company that said, "I'm so glad you're here. We didn't have anything to do before you got here." You know?
Right, yeah.
So preventive action systems, mostly it means you're running from the alligators rather than taking the time to drain the swamp.
Right, yeah. If you don't have a preventive action system in place, you're running away from those alligators or snapping at your heels.
One of the things they said is corrective actions is preventive action waited too long to take.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
then it occurs.
So how does it help to get rid of the requirement to have a preventive action system at all?
Well, they eliminated the actual requirement for preventive action system, but they did not intend to eliminate the thought process of how you identify risk and deal with it.
Yeah.
In fact, well, when you look at the preventive action programs that are in place in all companies that I've been in, is basically you're imagining what bad things can happen, and then what do we do to try to prevent them from happening?
Yeah, that is a good thing.
Well, yes, it is a good thing, and in fact, our automotive friends certainly recognize that as the failure modes effect analysis,
Yeah.
FMEA, and it is a very powerful tool. But the problem is you soon run out of bad things to think about.
Right.
And so if the only thing you think about is if you get a group of people sitting around the table thinking, oh, what bad things can happen, and then what are we going to mitigate them, it doesn't.
It'll only get you so far.
Right. So what the standard here is defining risk. Let's look at the definition. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on the expected result.
Well, that's about as clear as mud.
It is. So what it's really dealing with is it's to not just sit and think of the bad things that can happen, but what's uncertain about our process.
Yeah.
Risk is the effect of uncertainty on my hope for result. So, for example, the film crew, and I imagine everybody is glad I didn't show up in my pajamas today.
Very glad.
So, I had to show up presentable. So, risk-based thinking would mean I must give some thought to that. So if I go to the closet without doing any risk-based thinking and throw open the closet, what might I find?
Well, among other things, you may not have the appropriate clothes to wear.
Right, if I don't get buried and stuff falling off the shelf, but that's another story. Right, I might have some wild, bizarre-looking shirt because I didn't think about the uncertainty that I needed to have something to wear today. So
Why there's a wild and bizarre shirt in your closet, we don't know. But
So I might show up with that and be dragged off by the film crew and beaten with a stick, which I would kind of like to avoid that. So ISO 9001:2015 expects to see risk-based thinking throughout your process and see evidence of that's taken place.
what kind of evidence do you think that they're looking for?
Well, we'll make some suggestions about that as we get to the individual clauses because they're going to cover this throughout pretty much of the standard. And a formal risk management program might be useful for you, but it's not mandatory and it's not necessary, but it is necessary to have risk-based thinking throughout it, and we'll talk about that as we get to the applicable clauses.
Yeah. So another example of we are in the coming weeks here, we're going to start diving deeper into some of these specific things. We're just kind of covering an overview of these founding principles so that you understand the intent behind what we're going to see as we start unpacking this thing. So that'll do it for us this week. As always, again, like I said earlier, please, we invite your questions, your feedback, any real world examples of how you guys are using this in your own organization, and what do you want to see us cover, what do you want to see us talk about. You can contact us on our website, you can do it through email.
Pony Express?
We'll have them muck the stables and get them ready for you in case you're doing that. But yeah, send us your questions, and we look forward to hearing from you, and we will see you next time.
With my wild shirt.